So everybody should receive a message just to ask them to agree to record. Um, okay. Okay. So has everybody received their? Okay. Okay. And maybe for the purposes of the recording, um, we're here this morning from Cavan, Monaghan Arts and Health Forum to deliver Understanding Boundaries. My name is Kim Doherty. I'm joined by my colleague Elisha McCaffrey, who's the Arts and Health Manager for Cavan, Monaghan Arts and Health Forum. And we are the Irish partner in the Culture and Health EU platform. So, just to set the scene and the context for today, the Cultural Health Platform runs from the 1st of November 2024 until the 31st of October 2028. So, as Julie mentioned, we're following on from training we had last week in relation to establishing safe space, and today's session will cover boundaries. So, the idea behind sessions like this is that we're supporting and building artist capacities and today through reflection on boundaries. So we want to explore challenges, possible solutions, and that days like today support us in developing our key competencies and developing best practice in situations that might arise. Um, so I'm going to hand you over to Julie for the rest of the session. And Julie, you can let me know in terms of what we need to share or if you want me to
When I
stop
need with
sharing.
particular images, the order of the images. Okay.
Perfect.
So,
Sorry, Kim, will that work? Sorry, Kim, will that work if you go into the slideshow, so we don't see the rest of your screen possibly?
Let,
Might,
can you see
yeah,
that now?
yeah,
yeah,
great. Thank you. Sorry.
yeah, that's good. Thank you. So before we look at some images, which I've selected to open up the idea of boundaries. As I said before, it's an important aspect of self-care and self-responsibility. So I've created some scenarios using figures to illustrate different aspects of boundaries, different aspects of dynamics between people. And I like you to have maybe a notebook by you or pen or pencil. Give you a few moments to at least have a pen and pencil because there'll be a few quick exercises I will invite you to engage with in order to catch up with your own awarenesses as they unfold. Okay, so there will be a series of questions and responses at different times during the Zoom. Okay, so I like to say this about boundaries. We don't believe in boundaries, but there are some. It's not an act of faith. I would like to show some of the photographs which prompted me to think around the idea of boundaries. So those A to F images, Kim, would be good to see now. So this is a local place in Kerry called Stag Fort, and I think given the extent of these fortifications, the one or two entrances, but how boundaried it is, how it's set into the landscape, how it intimidates any people wanting to enter such a fort, such a hill fort, circular in form. So it's a very strong presentation of a boundary. You're not going to just get into there very easily. So that was a local example of a very boundaried space. So the next one, Kim. Again, this is a sort of bare landscape. The landscape is naturally boundaried. When we think of boundaries, we often think of maps and territories and physical geographical boundaries. And here we have a number of forms of boundary between land and water and man-made pathways, edges. When we work psychologically, we're working with inner edges and inner boundaries. But this is the outer manifestation that most people think of when they think of boundaries. I think of the geographical aspect and the limits of land, how it's partitioned. Okay, next one.
Sometimes it's just a bit slow to move. For me, it
Okay,
sticks.
yeah,
If it keeps sticking, I'll go back. I'll go out of the.
okay. The other images are more spaced apart, but these are just 6 quick ones. Yeah. This is one of my own paintings, just that I'm very much surrounded by the elements, air, sea, land, and these all have different degrees of boundary between them and different degrees of interaction. So boundaries are not always crystal clear in the way that maybe that first image is very, very graphic. Whereas I think in making images, you're exploring inner boundaries. This may be more of an inscape than a landscape. So playing with the idea, and then yeah, that's okay. This is a doorway is another boundary, another threshold from one space through a liminal space into another space. So, everyday boundaries, doorways, entrances, access, these are all forms of boundary where entrances and exits are controlled by the participants or the owners of the spaces. Yeah. Okay. So another form of boundary, one level to another. This lovely staircase in a monastery in Greece. Again, access, who gets access, who's allowed access, who's facilitated from one space to another, from one level to another. Big boundaries, much wider definition, I think. So the last one, please, Kim. Very familiar to those of you who are Irish. What an amazing presentation and set of boundaries. The doorway, the stone in front of the door, navigating this sacred space and the sense of solidity, protection. I know it was renovated and may not have been exactly like this to begin with, but it's a formidable presentation of different forms of access of light, access of dark, access of sacred space, and the liminal space that you have to navigate to enter in. So I just wanted
So,
to have those as
Julie,
different. Yes,
so just one question. Ruth asked in the chat, where is that?
this is in Newgrange. This is in the Boyne Valley, and it is an ancient megalithic site that was discovered and then reconstructed, and it's a very marvelous, miraculous dwelling because it aligns with the movement of the sun on the solstice, on the winter solstice. And there's a chamber inside which aligns exactly with that movement of the sun and actually the movement of Venus. So that light box, that box above the threshold, is where the sun comes in at that point on those days on the winter solstice. And so it's a construction, a very elaborate construction that looks at the connection between the macrocosm and us down here in our microcosmic experience. So making that connection by making boundaries to the light entering. And it's also quite a boundary to be there on the solstice. There's an annual lotto because there's only 3 days and a handful of people can go in there, so that you can enter the lotto and see if you can be one of the lucky winners at the winter solstice to go inside the chamber and see the light coming into the light box for those 3 days and the turning of the earth towards the beginning of the light after the winter darkness. So it's a very special thing to do, but you can actually pay the rest of the year to go and see it and to go in and see all of those forms. But I do find it interesting that there is a this large, very carved, special symbolic stone before you can enter the threshold and experience the light box above.
I think this year, didn't they live stream it on YouTube
They
this
do
year?
live stream it on YouTube, so you can see it. I think the last few years, yes, you can see it in real time. The last few years, but as I say, you might as well enter the lottery because it'd be a very special thing to have happen if you could get in there for the winter solstice. Okay, so we don't believe in boundaries, but there are some, and that was my idea to illustrate the different sorts of boundaries. And setting a healthy boundary is not so much a belief, but an act of faith in yourself, and in awareness of your needs for safety and respect. So there are many types of boundaries: physical, emotional, and energetic, to name just a few. But I hope that these examples will help you to unpack this complexity of this concept. But before we start, I'd like you all to do just a quick brainstorm on your pad and paper. Just when you think of the word boundaries, just any words that come up for you, just to quickly jot them down, and we'll return to this. So try not to self-censor, just whatever words come up with boundaries. Is that enough time? Are we good?
Yeah, so we've some in the chat. If we could use the chat box, if that's helpful, Julie. Would you like people to
Yeah,
put
some
into the
people, if
chat
they want
box?
to use the chat box, that's good too. And maybe some of those could be read out just to give people an idea of the spread.
Yeah, so the first ones we have in here is protection, fear, control, wall, safe, me, home, around, safety, borders and relationships, fear, guilt, empowerment, self-awareness, self-respect, safety, lines, spaces, limits, permission, enclosure, shield, protection, fences, space, line in the sand, people pleasing. Um, yes, there's quite a few
Yeah.
there.
So there's quite a number of strong emotions bound up with this, as well as the sense of the format and the forms of boundary, the emotional uh, aspects that come up pretty well immediately. Okay, so we'll just put that there for now. The dictionary definition of boundaries is a real or imagined line that marks the edge or the limit of something. So that applies both to physical spaces and personal and conceptual limits. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the first image, please, Kim. Okay. Sorry, the first scenario, yeah. Not quite as complicated as Newgrange. Um, so, the aspects are, first of all, physical aspects, personal space, physical bodily needs, including rest, interpersonal physical touch. And sometimes, in some ways, this is also culturally defined. So you will have probably come across the idea of your personal bubble, your energetic bubble. Um, so, for instance, stereotypically, Italian people tend to stand closer and just gesticulate more when talking to each other and communicating. Whereas people in colder, more northern climes, such as English, myself, we tend to be more standoffish. We tend to gesture less and we tend to give ourselves a bit more space. And I don't really know whether that has anything to do with the weather, because you'd think when it's colder, you'd want to stand closer. But, for some reason, we feel if we were meeting in real, we could actually experiment in terms of how closely we can tolerate the approach of somebody else. How far do they impinge on our personal bubble? Where is that edge? That's a very interesting exercise to do. Where is my bubble? There's the personal close bubble, and then there's the more extended bubble that includes a wider group of people or a wider space. So there's kind of like two levels of personal bubble, but we get very uncomfortable if the close one is infringed in ways that we don't expect. So we have a comfort zone, and it's important for us to be aware of where that is, because it's an individual thing, although it's culturally partly influenced. And then your emotional needs, which come up immediately, be aware of them, identify your emotions. Your needs are only capable of being fulfilled if you have awareness of what is actually being activated. Take responsibility for your personal sensibilities and sensitivities. There are unique and diverse experiences that need caring for at an individual basis. How much stress can you handle? What are the limits of your tolerance? How much information are you willing to take on board from other influences and other people? How much negativity are you able to sustain, say, through the news or the media? How much positivity are you able to contain? So asking yourself, what am I able for? What am I able to contain? What is too much? What makes me uncomfortable? Uh, you know, Prioritizing self-care around social media. What are your legitimate needs for privacy? How can you value your time and protect yourself from overcommitment? That relates back to the people pleasing. You know, Culturally, we've been conditioned, as females especially, to accommodate and please others as a priority. But unless we are in a good way ourselves, we're not really going to be able to facilitate other people anyway. The people pleasing can be an understandable response to some form of trauma, where there's fear, where there's I better placate this person. This is my boss. I better not say anything. I might get the sack. These fantasies come up, don't they? How do we accommodate other people, especially if there's a power imbalance? How do we maintain our self-worth and self-respect? So here we have, in this image, a variety of forms of boundary and fencing. And there's an enclosed space on the bottom right. There's a wider periphery that's enclosed with a fence. There's heavier fencing internally and pieces of fencing around the water, the pool, and then the bridge to the little island from the grass. the solidity of the grass. So here we have, little territories that I've marked out, and we can go to the next one. Just to look at the next one.
Yeah, it's stick.
It's sticking a bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is again a notional boundary. So the scarecrow is something that the farmer might create as a means of protecting valued crops from unwanted crows. So, this is an interesting symbolic way, but it's also a physical way of protecting what's important and valuable and fending off any threat to that value. So I see this as a very creative boundary that looks at how to intervene between the different needs of the plants and the crops and the birds, and that are all these competing needs, plus the farmer's need to have a crop. And so, this is to me a fantastic creation of a boundary that is, I think, a bit more effective than a local boundary that I saw in some fields a while ago. There was silage, the black silage bags, and written on top in big white paint was the words "feck off crows." Now, I doubt that was a really effective boundary unless crows can read. But, a scarecrow is a great invention. I think creating a boundary is often demanding our inventiveness, understanding the threat, understanding your need, and creating something which allows your need to be protected. But it does mean assessing the threat. It does mean knowing your adversary. And, the farmer knows that the adversary of the crows is going to be effectively dismissed by his invention of a pretend human flapping in the wind. Okay, so there are more scenarios, but I would like you to return to your brainstorm words for a few minutes. And I want you to look at the list and see which of those words has the most energy and potency for you in this moment right now. And which of those words would evoke an image or a symbol for yourself to understand the kind of issues that you're engaged with when you think about setting healthy boundaries. One of those words will have more energy for you than others. So I want to give you a few minutes, maybe only just 5 minutes, to think about which of those words has energy for you, which of those words represents your struggle with setting a healthy boundary or your ability to set and create a healthy boundary, be that interpersonal or be that work related.
Do you want us to make an image, Julie, or do you want us to just reflect on the words?
Well, initially reflect on the word, decide which word has energy for you, and that might be enough. But to take it further, to make a symbol, or if an image comes up for that, then just to make a note or to draw that image, if it's easier to draw it or make a note of it, because it could be an inner image
Okay.
or it could be an outer conception, but it's something which holds that issue for you.
Okay.
So if that's maybe bring that to some kind of conclusion. The reason I'm asking you to do that is I think it's helpful to be in touch with your own responses as we navigate these concepts together, because how you imagine will influence how you set your interpersonal healthy boundaries. How you create boundaries that are appropriate to you requires some self-awareness and self-knowledge um, of what the issues are. So I don't know if anybody's willing to share that image or say what that was like to do. If anybody wants to put that in the chat or unmute, there's an opportunity just to say that now if you feel comfortable to do so.
The root is unmuted.
Yeah, I got a good one. I don't know if you can
Right,
you,
yes.
so I put
Yes.
safe at the top
Yes.
and then it says slow, accept, feel, enact.
Wow, that is a good one. I reckon you could market that. It's a nice, concise. I love the way it interacts across and down. It has a solidity about it, the interconnection of those ideas.
Thank you.
So you're very happy with that anyway.
I am. I'm
Good,
very
Ruth.
pleased with my brain for
Yeah, your
conjuring
brain's definitely firing. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to say what that was like for them or anything in the chat there?
Yeah, so Alex just shared force, concentric circles like a dartboard, shifting and moving around like a pulse.
Ooh, that sounds quite focused and yet energetic. I like, yeah, the idea of the focus of the dartboard, but the energetic pulse. That we do have energetic boundaries,
Mm.
and we do have a pulse. So that's okay. Any others before we move on?
Rebecca?
Yeah,
Oops. Yeah, am I unmuted there? Yeah. So similar to Alex, that you can see, so some kind of circles that there's the healthy one at the end that I did, being
yeah,
a little bit more the idea of an unfolding fern came to me, so my boundaries were the energetic ones were limits and safety. So
yeah,
that unfurling, but personally, and I don't, hopefully not too much professionally, but creating more of that
yeah. For
full
yourself.
circle around, not the spaced lines, so yeah, just creating that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Would that would
Boundaries,
that feel would
boundaries.
that feel like a, something you could practically imagine going
Yes.
into a situation that you
Yeah.
could hold that image that you've self-created? That
Yeah.
self-created image means something to you going
Yeah.
into those situations.
Yes. Because that real body resonance, when you know that your boundaries have been crossed or you've weakened your own boundaries, and it's such a felt sense, isn't it, that you might not cognitively know why,
Yeah.
but after a bit of thought, you're like, yes.
M-
So yeah.
But at least the capacity to notice
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
that boundary has been breached.
Mm,
Usually we don't know straight away what that is or why that
mm,
was.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's only that we notice and we do that work
Yeah.
if we want to afterwards and go, exactly how did that happen?
Yeah.
Exactly what was that trigger?
Yes.
Exactly when has that happened before? And how
Yeah.
can I be creative in helping for that not to happen again?
Yeah. Lovely. Creative. Yeah.
What are the images which, if they are boundaried and then crossed, how can
Mm,
I help my rationale afterwards to
mm,
to reflect on how I lost that, how I
Yeah,
lost that
yeah,
containment. Yeah.
lovely. Yeah, 'cause my seemingly favorite phrase in that is, "Hang on a minute."
Yeah,
You know, hang
exactly.
on a
Actually,
minute.
that's very important, playing for time.
Yes,
I
yeah,
always used to say in my practice, if I was uncertain, if possible, play for time,
lovely, yeah.
because it's acknowledging that you don't yet know.
Mm,
So better to not act if you're not sure.
yeah.
Like
Something
just
I
allowing
tell my
yourself to
kids,
be
but
unsure,
yes.
allowing yourself that uncertainty consciously and saying, well, I'm not going to intervene or act yet until I understand better what's going on.
Yeah, lovely.
So
Thanks, Julie.
I'm looking at groups, when we're presenting and facilitating groups, we're in a shared field. And so, how to navigate that energetic and physical and emotional and mental shared field. Because regardless how clear we are about our aims and objectives in the work we're engaged with, there's always numerous invisible factors at play in a group, such as you've got different levels of motivation, you've got different values, you've got different expectations, you've got cultural and even religious considerations. There are so many invisible factors when you're running a group. And the thing is, if you're running a group in a creative context, then all those variables and others are more likely to come to the surface. And that's to do with the dynamic nature of creative expression. So those invisible factors come into play and become visible or become more tangible in a group setting.
Just in the chat, Julie, if it's
Yes.
okay, I just
Yeah.
want to acknowledge it's slightly late because I couldn't interrupt.
No.
So Claire just said it's not at the time that you realize boundaries are crossed, it's later on, and then it creates a lot of anxiety.
Yes. Yes, it does. You don't always know at the time.
Yeah.
It does create anxiety because you feel unsafe because your boundary has been crossed. So the anxiety is the one of the ways that you realize that your boundary's been crossed. I mean, anxiety is a great flag for, well, something's not quite right here. But then the work is to find out what was that. Because, if you're happy in your work and good at your work, it shouldn't really be fraught with overfraught with anxiety. So if you are overwrought and overwhelmed with anxiety, then that's a really great clue that something isn't right with the setup or the way things have been created or co-created.
And
So,
Julie, can I
yeah,
just on that, would you repeat the last couple of words? Because I thought the last words you listed
okay.
there were very helpful. I could write them into the chat.
Okay, so do you mean of the list of like the expectations and the cultural and
And the
religious
values, yeah, all of those
values?
things.
Values, they're really motivators, but in a group, you don't know what the values are. You don't know if there are competing values. You don't know what the expectations are. There are cultural differences which can also emerge, and also religious considerations which also motivate people to attend an experience or a workshop. So all of these and any of these and many more besides are in the mix. But when you're using creativity, they're much more likely to express themselves or arise due to the dynamic nature of creativity. So this is where verbal contracts, shared agreements, and what you might call ground rules contribute to the creation of a safe space in order for exploration to happen. So an example of agreed boundaries might be, well, we're a closed membership or we're an open membership, that we allow new members or we don't. Or we meet at such and such a venue, at such and such a frequency, at such and such a time. Those kind of time boundaries and space boundaries towards safety and predictability and consistency. Consistency also helps for the safety. And, or there may be a rule, well, if we can't attend, we respect the group by sending an apology. So these things foster mutual respect. These kind of ground rules you invent in order to promote safety and responsibility towards the members. Okay. Okay, so in the role of facilitator, you are actually in a privileged position, but the downside is that unlike anybody else in the group, you're not free to just walk out if things go pear-shaped. So you pay for the privilege by you're the one who has to hang in if things become problematic. Hopefully, your position will be readily accepted by the group and you won't be unduly challenged. Though there is a defense mechanism called kill the therapist, which means one of the members wants to take the therapist out because they'd feel safer if they were the therapist. I hope you don't have to experience that one. But, you need to be aware of the possible insecurities of the group members in the group dynamics and the many ways that can play out. So, are there any questions before I show you another image?
Do we need to make a group agreement, Julie? Or I wonder, do people here feel like they use Zoom a lot, or it's not necessary, or is even just discussing it enough for people?
Yeah, how do people feel? I mean, we're talking about the insecurity of the facilitator and the insecurities in the group.
And just naming it around safe space and boundaries.
I think naming it around safe space and boundaries, there will always be insecurities, but hopefully they're at a manageable level, and naming them is a great way to diffuse them. And this is where naming any kind of uncomfortablenesses, that uncomfortablenesses are part of the process. Anxieties and uncomfortablenesses and insecurities are actually welcome because they're real. That we don't do a group to show how fortified and like Stag Fort. We're not doing groups like we're Stag Fort.
Do you want to explain that?
That first image of in Kerry there, that massive heavy boundary, that we're impenetrable. That nobody in a group is impenetrable. They may be defended, they may be shielded, but nobody is impenetrable. So therefore, insecurities and anxieties are actually welcome. Does that make sense?
It does. I suppose part of the context, of these trainings in general is because, say, with our culture and health platform, where it's space for us to think about all of these things,
Yeah.
because potentially as artists or as facilitators, we're going into different settings where there's all sorts of different things happening.
Yeah.
And we're just having this space to think about it and to
Yeah.
think about how can we create safe space, look after our boundaries or understand what boundaries in general mean, or understand what they mean in sentence. Or maybe if people don't have aware of boundary, aren't aware of boundaries, how do we deal with that as well?
Well, this is the usefulness of ground rules, and collective agreements at the beginning of a group, because not everybody has an awareness of boundaries or even their personal boundaries. There are certain forms of psychological defense that mean boundaries are not understood. They don't factor into that person's awareness. But somebody who, that can be learned, but, there needs to be consent and contracts and agreements in order for learning to happen, that boundaries are actually useful and helpful. I want to show another image. I'd try and give an example in these little scenarios that I've created with figures. The couples dynamic. Okay, so I've got two pairs here. I'm sorry, the quality of the photographs would have been better if it hadn't rained on me twice and I had to do it inside instead of outside. So we have a couple that are in this safe on the right hand side, a man and woman. They're dressed the same, same colors. The two on the outside, two guys on the outside, they're not yet in the territory of the other couple. Okay. So then this moves on. So I move it into the second of these two scenarios. So now they're meeting. Okay. So this could be a group. And what you have with the two guys is that the guy on the left actually has the same colors as the guy and girl on the right. Whereas your man in the orange, symbolically can potentially be isolated here. Because if you're one in the shirt and blue trousers is invested in the belonging and the sameness, we all agree. He could easily go across, if you like, to the other pair, and your man with the orange could be isolated as being different. He could even in a group be scapegoated, or he might feel so uncomfortable feeling different that he might withdraw himself to make himself safe. So, feeling different or feeling acceptable, these are all in the undercurrents of a group. It's your job as a facilitator to try and bridge the differences. The facilitator is actually here as the bridge to name if somebody is being isolated or marginalized or in subtle and unsubtle ways rejected by the others, who from their own insecurity feel they need to do that in order to feel that they are the ones who are right and who belong. So all of these undercurrents happen in a group, and it's important to try and understand the dynamic of what's going on. If somebody is feeling uncomfortable, then it's to support them, to say what's going on for them, to make it safe for them to say, to make it safe for those things to be named. So that's creating a mutually safe space for exploration to happen.
So, Julie, there's
Yeah,
one comment in the chat. So
yeah,
it's renegotiation.
yes,
So it's from Sylvia, was my word. She says, my image was one of those playground contraptions that you're constantly trying to rebalance on. So creativity equals challenge equals fear equals part of the process.
yes, yes, absolutely agree with that. That it's a constant rebalancing, and it's okay for a group to renegotiate. I worked with a group of teenagers during COVID, and they negotiated their own ground rules. But then a situation emerged which the ground rules didn't cover. And then I encourage them to renegotiate the ground rules so that situation, to integrate that situation, that what ground rules had to be added or changed to address the actual dynamic reality of the situation that arose.
And we've one more in the chat.
Mhm.
Tiana says, but being different also gives you a completely unique perspective, sometimes so rewarding for an artist.
Absolutely, absolutely. That difference is what allows progress to be made often. Often it's the last person to speak in a group who's the one that's worth waiting for. You know, often it's the one who has that different view that has the best thing to offer for the group well-being. So the values in the differences, but the default position where there's insecurity is we all have to agree and we all have to be the same. That's the default position of insecurity. So it takes openness and courage to allow values to be challenged, because if somebody's going to see things differently, you're going to be invited to maybe open up to another possibility.
So Ruth ponders an interesting question here in the chat, and she says, how would you work between seeking sameness and diversity?
Well, I think they're both valuable, you see. They both have pros and cons. In some sense, they're both needed for a creative situation to happen. They're not mutually exclusive. If you like the man, the guys on the left, that pair, they were attracted to and tolerate each other's differences, but within the sameness of their gender. Whereas the other couple, the male-female difference, but in other respects, they're on the same value system, if you like. So you can have sameness and difference at the same time, just different categories. There's always a degree of sameness and there's always a degree of difference, and they're not mutually exclusive, and they're both valuable, and they're both necessary. Because in the end, we are the same species, although occasionally it doesn't feel like that. Yeah, we're the same species for a start. But
I
then
think
there are differences that are perceived, and some are real.
I think there's other people in the chat who might have unmuted if they want to.
Okay.
Is there another question in the group? No, maybe not. Okay.
Okay. So just another exercise. How have you got any ideas, just to write them down, what you would how you would handle a situation if one person in a group becomes some kind of negative focus? What things would you do to handle somebody who was either being scapegoated or attacked or minimized, undermined, all these things that can happen? How would you handle it? Any ideas around that one? Anything in the chat?
Yeah. So Teresa said she would steer the conversation on to something different.
Yes, that's a good one. You can deflect,
Um,
and you can also actually generalize. So you can take it from the particular and you can generalize it out so that it's not focusing on that person, but the issue is being named and aired without focusing on a particular group member.
So Rebecca says revisit the initial group contract.
Yes. Yes, I think so. I think so. I think all legislation needs to be in a process of change to cope with the development of new situations.
I think some of the phrases used, so on some of the Zooms I've attended, is they talk about the group document being a live document,
Yes.
and we can
Yes.
come back to it.
Yes.
Um, uh,
Yes,
Claire,
because we can't anticipate everything that can arise. And especially with the dynamics of creativity, we can't possibly anticipate all of that.
and Claire says, explain calmly to the group why the behaviour isn't tolerated, and if it escalates, talk to the person privately.
Very good. Very good.
Um,
I've done those things, yes. They're effective. Yeah.
I know in Ireland at the moment there's training called bystander training,
Mm-hmm.
and myself and Elisha took part in it. It was very interesting. And I suppose two things came up that way that day, and it was around, I suppose it's in the name, active
Mm,
bystander, that
mm,
you do something about it. But then
mm.
the other side of it as well is if something is being done on to someone else, that you don't rob them of the chance to stand up for themselves too.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was interesting there, and it's complex. And I think sometimes, you know, that thing, Julie, of naming things in the particular
Mm,
or in the general rather than in the particular. I think people receive them the same.
mm.
Um,
Oh, they do.
and if it turns, I think sometimes that's when bullying can be very difficult for people to name, because a lot of stuff goes out there in the general. It can be
Yeah.
communicated
I
in
mean,
that
I think
way.
sometimes behavior needs to be named with, say, that a bully is a very defended person. You know, they are projecting. We're going to look at that in a minute. They are projecting onto the other person. And psychologically, the victim, if you like, of the bullying is often internalizing both roles, internalizing that conflict. And often it feels very overwhelming to be in that victim position. So the strength to stand up for yourself, for your own respect in whatever way can be done safely. But psychologically, the bully is in a worse position than the victim because the victim usually processes the dynamic sooner or later, whereas the bully is defended and will continue to use that defense against their own vulnerability until it's called. And the facilitator then has to call that for the safety of the group. So sometimes the facilitator has to intervene where damage is potentially being done.
And
And
then
so, you have to choose what to generalize and what to pinpoint. But certainly, I would say the victim is not in a great space, but is in a better psychological position than a bully who is purely defended from their own insecurities. Anyway, I want to
the
try.
chat, there's just
Yeah,
one more
go
comment
on.
in the
Yeah,
chat. So Sylvia says facilitator's duty is to intervene verbally as soon as possible,
yeah,
following a reminder, read ground rules, and then pause by moving on to an exercise.
yeah. Excellent work. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so try this next one. There's an image 5, and there's two different characters entirely. These two. I'm sorry, they're a bit dark. Can you see them well enough?
Mhm.
So who do you imagine? What do you imagine is the relationship here? How do you think these two are getting on? Any ideas?
Mother and daughter.
Yeah, I think so. Looks like that, doesn't it? Can you see, are they getting along? What's the
No.
feeling? No, shaking head. Ruth is shaking her head. Yeah, you see there's no boundary here. You can see there are body language, facial gestures. There's no real boundary here. Okay. So let's look at the next image.
It's just stuck.
Yeah. They're stuck, mother and daughter. Yeah. So now there's a boundary there. There's a boundary between them, a brick wall, a stone wall. So which party do you imagine put up the boundary? This is pure projection. It's just a bit of there's no right or wrong answer, but just who do you imagine put that boundary there?
The daughter.
Mm-hmm. Any others for daughter?
Yeah, we've more for daughter in the chat.
Yeah, more for daughter than the mother. Yeah. So boundaries are not a negotiation, but a decision by the person who feels the need to protect themselves from attitudes or behaviors that they believe are harmful or which overwhelm them. And, there's a huge issue around intergenerational estrangement in the society because sometimes, the radical need for personal space often is on the part of the child, and it's the best solution that person can think of at the time that they need to make that boundary. So sometimes it's the boundary of removing oneself. If the boundary of putting things between doesn't work, then the more radical boundary is to become estranged or to relinquish the relationship or risk relinquishing it. So the setting of a boundary, it's not intended to control another person, but to clearly communicate needs, and ideally to communicate them in ways that foster trust and mutual respect wherever possible. But again, if that isn't possible, sometimes, the nuclear option is to remove yourself. That might be the case with, say, a narcissistic personality, where there's very little negotiation, very little relatedness. The solution might be to have to move away to preserve your own integrity. There's a poem by Robert Frost called Mending Wall. It's quite a famous poem. I wanted to read some of it, but I've abridged it. And he writes, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that spills the upper boulders in the sun. I let my neighbour know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk a line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen each to each. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. One on a side, it comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need a wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says good fences make good neighbours. Why do they make good neighbours? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd like to know what I was walling in or walling out. And he says again, good fences make good neighbours. Okay, so image 7, please.
So Rebecca enjoyed that.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks. It's called Mending Fences,
Just bear with me because
and
it's
it's by it's Mending Wall by Robert Frost, an American poet.
I'll just stop
Okay.
sharing for a second and see
Yeah,
if it
you're okay.
works.
So when communication breaks down, you will get situations like the next two slides. So communication is broken down between mother and daughter, and the daughter is looking at mother and just seeing a giant gorilla head, you know? She's no longer seeing mother, and mother is no longer seeing daughter, but seeing this great threatening dragon person, this fierce dragon. So we easily project when we feel uncomfortable and unsafe. So this is the sort of thing that can also happen in a group, is that the people are not seen as people anymore, but as something else. The imagination's a wonderful thing, but we can lose the run of ourselves with it. Do you want to just show the next slide, Kim, please?
Yeah, and I just have to let two people in.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll stop sharing again because it just keeps
Yeah, yeah.
sticking.
Well, I mean, while we're waiting for the next slide, maybe write down for yourself any recognition, either in your own life or in your work, where projection is live and happening, where somebody is not being seen as a person, but as a something else. If that has happened to you, or how you haven't been seen as a person, but maybe you've been portrayed as something else other than who or what you are. Because all this stuff happens in groups, because the imagination won't lie down. It's giving us information as to how safe we are or not. So this is the same situation reversed. So the daughter is seeing the mother as a dragon, essentially overwhelming, and the mother is seeing the daughter as, this gorilla head that just makes noises incoherently. Is anybody willing to share an example of projection?
So there's just a comment in the chat,
Mhm.
Julie. So mask making and art therapy with my eldest in teen years, brilliant.
Yes, yes, because a mask allows a conscious projection. When I put on a mask, I know that I am being something else. Whereas projection happens unconsciously. We don't recognize it until maybe afterwards, if we do recognize it. So mask making is great for allowing those fantasies to be expressed safely, because we can take the mask off.
So Rebecca has a question there, Julie.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was just an addition to that, actually, because with navigating that first, it was the first time I felt some separation with my daughter, and didn't know how to navigate that. So that mask making really allowed us. We made each other's who we thought each other was. That
Wonderful.
projection. So I made fish eyes,
Mm.
which was what I got when I tried to talk to her, the dead fish eyes. And she made a queen like with the pointy, like that expression, like, So yeah, it was so useful.
Wow, well done. I mean, what a great thing to be able to do with your daughter, and that she was able to do it as well.
Yes,
That she
yeah,
felt safe enough.
Yeah, brilliant.
And that you were able to take that risk. Yeah. I mean, art is just so revealing, isn't it? The image is so revealing. Yeah. Well done. And so things a bit more settled and okay now with between you.
Yeah, that was years ago. She's
Yeah.
26 now, but yeah, that I mean, I think, you know, when you take that risk in that space, I mean, and obviously, you know, with clients, that's especially your own children, if you're willing to take that risk in that space with them and offer that place for them to well, almost introducing that other place. You know, it's
Yeah.
not just me and you,
Yeah.
it's there's another place. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really effective.
And I
Um,
think art making is that other place. It's that third thing. It's no longer just that polarity between you and another. It's this
mhm.
third navigating, negotiating area.
Yeah, yeah, because that communication needs to be learned, doesn't it, between the two
Yeah,
of you, you know, and each
yes,
subsequent child.
absolutely. We're not, when we're not
Yeah,
taught it enough, I think.
no.
We don't have the tools to really teach those kind of negotiations, but art is a great third element in those attempts to make ourselves understood
Mm.
to another person. Yeah.
I'm
Okay,
just
so
wondering,
yes, go on.
sorry, Julie. I'm just wondering, I wonder do people need a comfort break? It's just a quarter to 12 and I know we're finishing at half 12, but I'm just wondering if people
Yeah,
need.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that would be good because we're covering quite a lot of ground, and especially if you've been looking at projection in your own life and work, you probably need a break.
Mm.
So we can take a few minutes for that. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just 11:47 on my laptop now. So will we say 5, 10 minutes? What do people think?
Yeah,
So, so what's that? Come back at 5 to 12 then?
yeah,
Come back.
sure. And I mean, I've only got four more, 9, 10. No, I've only got two more images to cover anyway. So yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, perfect.
And questions. Lovely. Thank you.
So, so I've just switched our recording back on. So that is a nice message in the chat.
Mm.
And then from Claire, it's a very interesting workshop. One thing I've noticed is we're all women in this workshop. I sent the workshop to one of my male friends who is running into a lot of problems with having boundaries. He would have found it very useful, but he didn't sign up. But sure, maybe he'll see the recording.
Yeah, that's the usefulness of the recording, isn't it? That people can work through in their own time and revisit. Yeah.
That's it.
Was there anything else in any other question left from the looking at projection in their own life? So we could move on if not.
There's nothing I can see in the
Yeah,
chat.
that's fine. That's
Um,
absolutely fine. We can move on. There are actually three more images I can't count. It's image number 9.
so is it
Yeah.
this one?
Yeah, this one. So, we have a little person on the left with Stone Age man with a little club. And then we have a Stone Age woman with a huge axe. So when there's irreconcilable differences between parties and the power dynamic is very unequal, the most effective form of self-preservation can be withdrawing from the scene. So absence or estrangement, as mentioned earlier with the daughter situation, it can be a last resort to protect mental health. There is a theory from family therapy that any relationship can work where there is the right distance. Now, that might mean somebody living in Australia at the other side of the world, but any relationship can work if the distance is a functional distance. That's a theory. So the next image, number 10.
Okay, so just bear with me. I might.
Yeah, you're good. It's fine.
I'll just stop sharing just for a second and go again.
I'm glad. Thanks for doing this because I wouldn't be good.
No problem. It just sticks. I don't know why it does that, but
Well, it's a sticky theme. So this is a more equal confrontation. The engagement is equally matched, but the boy on the right is being the offensive person, and the other boy on the left is defensive, presenting a physical boundary. Boy on the left protects his territory and his personal space to preserve his integrity in the face of a perceived threat. Well, it's an actual threat or perceived threat. Both parties have the option of fight, flight, or coming to a mutually respectful agreement. Okay. And so then I'm going to just say I created the 5 C's, the 5 letter C's of healthy boundaries. So I don't know if you want to write these down, but the first one is communication, consent, comfort, compassion for self and others, and conviction. So if that's an easy way for people to remember some of the key features.
so that's the 5
So
C's.
my proposition is that clear boundaries are necessary for good working and personal relationships. And so these last 2 images symbolize 2 models or 2 examples or approaches of a successful boundary maker person. Okay. So we've said before, when confronting an antagonist, it's important that you actually are physically safe in order to do so. I can think of an example where I had to confront somebody who was being incomprehensibly antagonistic towards me, selecting me out within a group, negatively projecting, and I got very exercised and upset about it, which is what happens when you feel attacked. And then I decided I would do 2 things. I wrote a complaint, a letter of complaint, but I also, before I did that, I wanted to see if I could sort it out face to face with the person. And rather than going into the kind of rundown of all the events, I said to the person, "Have I always respected you?" And they were embarrassed and they kind of went red and said, "Well, yes, yes, yes." And I said, "Well, all I'm asking for is that you do the same for me." And then I walked away. And I didn't have problems after that. But it had gone on for a good long time. So, it's like I had to be sure I was safe to approach that person. I had to be sure of my grounds. And I made it as simple and direct as I could think of. And I also knew that I could walk away when I'd said that what I wanted was the same respect that I gave that person. So, that's just a real life example of how things can change when healthy boundaries are established in a conflict situation. Okay, so this is figure 11. So, there is a sense when you create a healthy boundary, you do feel healthy. You do feel like this person, that you can navigate space, that you can be expressive and you can be yourself. And basically, you're able to navigate tricky situations. So this is the image in my imagination of a person who has understood the importance of maintaining personal boundaries and who has protected his or her well-being and their identity, and they've done it with a degree of self-awareness and grace. Yeah. And then there's one last image. So this represents a different way of maintaining a boundary. This is a person who's mastered him or herself in a more internal way. They're actually holding a little dish that opens and closes. This person is clear about their own values and needs. They're able to set appropriate limits to their engagement with others, but also able to promote mutual respect. So that's basically the end of my fantasy images of imagined scenarios. There are obviously many variations possible, but hopefully they serve to give different dimensions to the whole idea of boundaries. So I'm interested in the last part to look at the last writing exercise, which was where you have been the subject of projection, or where you've projected, or awareness of others doing that, or any other questions around working and dealing with tricky miscommunications, boundary violations. So I'd like to just open it up for the last 20 minutes or so to any real life experiences that people are prepared to ask questions about.
So I'm wondering, would it be helpful if I pause the recording?
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
think so. You want to do that one again?
Yeah, so I'll read one of the ones we've addressed already, and then I'll go back to the other two. So we've just spoken to, or Julie, you've just spoken to, is there an act to prevent yourself being emotionally involved or saddened by what someone is going through in the group, and not to feel too emotional while still remaining empathetic? And then again, you spoke to, is there a point where boundaries become too strong and you become defensive? How do you prevent this? And then on the back of those two, are there any exercises you would recommend before hosting a creative workshop, grounding exercises or things to think about?
Yeah. Well, I'll take them backwards now. So, before a workshop, I think the main thing is to think about what do you need, what are your aims and objectives, what do you want to communicate? To focus on the job rather than yourself. But if you find yourself getting feelings about this job and this delivery, then you do need to attend to those feelings, either talk them out with somebody, get some support, because you need to go into a workshop with as much equilibrium and balance as you can muster. That might mean doing a physical thing, grounding exercise. It might mean remembering to breathe. It might mean anything that helps you to be in a balanced, open state. So dealing with anxieties, dealing with doubts, information is useful to clarify what is the purpose of this workshop or this group. So constantly revising the aims and objectives and honing them down so that at least you know what you're aiming for. So I think that's the way of getting out from oneself and looking at what's the best way to communicate this and what needs to happen. While a group is in progress, I often ask myself the question, what is trying to happen now? When I'm in a live group situation, I'm constantly asking, just what is trying to emerge, what is trying to happen right now. And I'll ask that several times in a group. But I don't do preparation other than what are my aims and objectives? Is there a theme? Okay. So then if you're in a group and then you're getting something very powerful, very emotionally powerful, and you're very much connecting to that emotion for yourself, and you realize, you first of all recognize that you are vulnerable to being overwhelmed by an over identification with somebody's emotional state. It's important to be empathic enough to attune to their situation and their feelings, but to over identify and get it mixed in with yourself is not helpful. So recognizing that you're in that danger, you need to park your own stuff and model more equilibrium than you're actually feeling at that moment, because it's not particularly the job of the group to sort out your emotional distress. That's something for afterwards in the reflection and in getting support or doing some work to find out, how did you get triggered like that? But you do need your feelings enough that you can identify and understand and facilitate somebody else to hold them in that distress. So your job is to hold them and do your work afterwards, if necessary. Sort out what's yours and what's not yours. You have to do that afterwards.
So, Julie, just on that point, there's two more comments in the chat. One's a comment more than anything, and then the other is a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sasa says, I bring that to supervision.
Mm.
And then Ruth's question is on the back of that question, what happens if someone is oversharing in the group?
Yeah. Yeah, so I agree with the supervision that it's very important that you maintain your equilibrium by working any unfinished business through supervision. But somebody else oversharing is a problem for the group. It's also a problem for the person because they need to share, but they also need to be contained. So if they are flooding the group, it makes the group feel unsafe for the others. And it's also not ideal for the person because they're bringing more material than they can actually process in the time. You know, we want enough material to be processable in the time frame that's given. So you need to find ways of kindly, gently, or sometimes urgently stop them from flooding. It's a felt thing. It's like you don't want to give the message that emotions are not welcome, but you also don't want to give somebody permission to be in a cathartic state which they can't control and they can't stop. So it's a delicate thing. And they need to be acknowledged in their distress or in that, naming that feeling. But you don't want it to go on too long for the tolerance of the group, and that's a felt thing. Just remember that letting them just roll isn't necessarily the best thing for them, because they'll have feelings afterwards. They'll feel probably exposed or shamed or guilty. They will internalize that later on, because they'll pick up on the non-verbal judgments if they happen while they are emotionally flooding. So it's better to allow the tolerable amount, but also in such a way that they can have a chance to process it in the time available rather than have to take it home. So that's about naming and acknowledging, I think. Does that make sense? Does anybody else want to contest that or come back on that? I mean, have other people found ways of handling that are outside what I've suggested?
I think it's a good point, Julie. Because I know, say, for example, in a previous in a previous project where we were dealing with under 18s, there was a big discussion around um, them sharing their experience because if their mental health changed, for example, so something that would be okay today might not be okay in a couple of months' time or even a year's time. And then, if they were identifiable or if any of this feedback, etc., was shared, that and it's like the consent bit like today if we're recording all of that stuff, it comes up because consent can change. I
Mm,
suppose that's another issue too.
mm.
So yeah, that the potential for someone to overshare and then afterwards to regret it is there. Yeah.
And it's part of your responsibility towards people's safety. You know, that they you don't want them to have repercussions afterwards, or be re-traumatized. And on the other hand, you don't want to give the feeling that emotions are to be dismissed and not appreciated and valued. That the emotions are there for good reasons, if you like. The heart has its reasons, and you can certainly support on that basis. The other thing is structurally, you can get people to share, especially a new group, you can get people to share in small groups or pairs rather than expecting somebody to have the confidence to share with a wider number. So, and if those pairs are changed rather than not always the same person, but if there's pairs work and small group work that moves around, then the material gets more equally shared and it gets dissipated. Whereas one person kind of just flooding on their own for a wider group, which has again unknown values, that's not exactly safe.
No. So the other question or comment in the chat is also in ground rules mention if triggered to go to therapy or to resource selves outside group afterwards. And then Sasa also says also reflecting in a short writing exercise in the end helps before sharing.
Yes, I think writing helps anyway because it helps focus. But yes, some groups are not therapy groups. Not every group is a therapy group. So if it's a creative group or a social group, then the therapy aspect isn't appropriate, even though you can encourage somebody to take themselves to a more appropriate setting for that kind of understanding of what's going on for them. That's not the contract in every group, and so therefore that a distinction has to be made. That's not the work of this group unless it is. So if it was if it was a psychodrama group, then there's a common consent that there could be quite cathartic experiences witnessed, and usually then there's a check-in with the witnesses of how is it for you. That's the other way of diffusing one person being under the spotlight, is just seeking out the responses of the witnesses. What did that do for you? Did that trigger anything for you? Did that make you think of anything? So then everybody has ownership of that emotional temperature, and it's not just identified with one individual. So are we there? Does that make sense? Are we good?
Yeah, so this is to close off. So I've been in previous classes and workshops where the facilitator has created an unsafe environment. So people in the group are afraid to walk, and people are in the group are afraid to walk away.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
difficult.
well, that's I mean, it's that facilitator has not found adequate ways of making that group safe. And there may be reasons for that aren't up to the facilitator, but it's not the ideal model. And safety and consensus need that sort of agreements need to be found. But there are reasons why a group might not feel safe, and that might not come to light until a long time later, if ever. And that's usually to do with something very difficult being repressed. So something is very suppressed and repressed. It doesn't mean that the group doesn't feel it. It might never be owned, it might never be said, but it does have an effect on the group, and that's not within the power of the facilitator, although it is the responsibility of the facilitator to make a situation as safe as is possible. But in the end, there has to be an agreement to participate or not. And if there's nothing happening, then better to disband it and say, well, look, this isn't working. How can we change this? What else can we do? I mean, it's that honesty that this isn't working because it doesn't feel safe. And then it's the group, the problem of the whole group to decide how can it change.
So, Julie, I'm conscious a lot of people have put thank yous into the chat, which is great, and really positive comments. And then it's just 12:30 now, and thanks to everybody for all their being generous with their time and attending today. And then I'm just going to pass you over to my colleague Elisha for a second.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to Julie and to Kim. And thank you for everyone for contributing and for your time today. As I said, I'm the Arts and Health Manager based at Cavan Arts Office. My email is emccaffrey@cavancoco.ie. If anyone has any questions in relation to our training or any upcoming trainings or the Culture and Health platform, please drop me an email. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
That's super. So my name is Kim. I've been your host for today and your moderator. So that's why you heard my voice probably a little bit as well. And then I'll hand you over to, thanks again to Julie and to Elisha and to the Culture and Health platform, and to each of you for being here. And I'll hand you over to Julie now just for our close.
Well, just appreciations all around, and your time, and I value your contributions, and you're doing valuable work, and you're even opening up dimensions through creativity, and this is the way to go. So encouragement to all of you in all your different settings and in all your different ways of working. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. So we'll end it there. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.